Assassin's Creed Shadows has been officially revealed, and I wanted to talk about it a little bit today and take a look at everything we actually know so far. But a lot was actually revealed with the trailer for the game, and IGN actually talked to the developers and got a lot of information as well, which we're also going to pull from. This is a game set in feudal era Japan, and most importantly, I think you have to kind of look at the history of this time. This is set during a time of civil war in Japan. I think there's a lot of really important things to pull from this trailer and from the reveal, but one of the biggest to me right away is that it's going to have dual protagonists. So this is going back to the era of Assassin's Creed Syndicate in terms of that idea of having dual protagonists when we got to see Evie and Jacob Fry, an idea that I think has been kind of neglected in AC, if done well, could be really fun. And they're actually doing that to combine two different gameplay styles in this game. One is of a shinobi, essentially a ninja. Now here's the thing, I'm gonna do my best with the history here. There's gonna be some things that are mispronounced. I'm just trying to talk about the game in the context of that history the best I can. But essentially shinobi were warriors that use subterfuge, that use stealth. Very similar to the standard assassins that we know. And one of them is actually going to be playable in this game, and I believe her name is pronounced Naui. I originally thought it was Naue, but everybody says Naui, so we're gonna go with Naui in this. And she looks to be the one that I'm going to play as more personally, just because she's so focused on stealth and shadows themselves. Meanwhile, there is also a really cool samurai in this game named Yasuke, which I believe is the first time you are actually playing as a historical character that really did truly 100% exist in history. So that's going to be something interesting as well. And he's going to be taking on more of the samurai side of actual combat gameplay. Now, there's a couple things we're gonna have to get into here, and my opinions are going to definitely be in this video. It's my channel, so I don't wanna just parrot a couple articles and repeat a couple things that other people said. We are going to get into Yasuke as well and talk about him. I know that that's an elephant in the room for a lot of people, is that this is a black samurai in Japan, and people are saying that didn't happen, that never existed. I'm going to talk about that because there was actual historical documentation of this actually existing and happening, but I also want to tell you why I think they did choose this character. So we're going to get into all of that in the opinions a little later after I cover some of the facts. If you enjoy this video, you want to watch more of this channel, I appreciate it very much. Leave a like, subscribe. I have a whole Assassin's Creed playlist. I've been covering more Watch Dogs stuff recently, which is another Ubisoft franchise I actually really like, that I think got the short end of the stick. I've been playing through Assassin's Creed games actually on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays, where I talk with my friend Nate a lot as well, and he actually has a history degree, so we talk about a lot of this stuff over there. So one of the biggest things I think about this story that's going to be interesting is that this is a recreation of 1579 Japan. Again, it's going to have samurai, shinobi, Portuguese merchants, Jesuit missionaries, essentially everything that era had, at least publicly. You know, it's not like a one-to-one historical recreation, but it's the best we're gonna get for quite a while. And a quote from Stephanie Ann Ruada, the world director and historian at Ubisoft Quebec, I thought was interesting was, as always for an Assassin's Creed game, we try to pick a setting that is a pivotal moment in history that can also allow plenty of gameplay opportunity. It would be the last time that samurai would fight a major battle and the last time that they would have a strictly military role, talking about the period that this is taking place in, which is the Sengoku period. Again, trying to pronounce everything the best I can. And in the words of Richtofen,
I'm sorry, I don't speak Japanese.
So narrative director Brooke Davies weighed in on Yasuke, one of the two playable characters, and said that Yasuke is somebody who is going to tie together many of the most powerful figures in our era. He really is a great point of entry to this as well, with Oda Nobunaga on one side and on the other side the Portuguese that he arrives with. He really does a lovely job of connecting the dots historically, what we know factually, and then narratively we had so much fun imagining the kind of person who would have this trajectory. And something that I think is interesting with Yasuke to kind of take a look at this is he was an actual character, he was a real person in Japanese history. Now, he was brought to Japan in around 1579 by a Jesuit missionary, and something that's interesting is that there's not a lot known about his origins. Like, people think he was probably born in Mozambique, but people don't know if he was brought to the country as a slave. People don't know if he was brought to the country as a fellow missionary. That wasn't really actually well documented in history, but something that was documented is that he was a larger than life figure that a lot of people were very surprised by. Now, I think the elephant in the room is that a lot of people are frustrated that the first Japanese set Assassin's Creed game is starring a black man. Now, here's the thing. This was a real person in history. I understand that there are a lot of other real, samurai that I'm sure would have been interesting to play as, or fake ones too that they could have made up. A lot of people are looking at the decision of Yasuke and they're saying this is an ESG thing, which if you don't know what that is, it's environmental social governance. And there's this whole talk around culture war and all these different things, like we covered Sweet Baby Inc. and all these things. Now, a lot of people are looking at Yasuke and they're saying, okay, well, clearly they picked him because he's a black man, and that's it. And I'm not necessarily entirely sure if that's the case or not. I do think that with this character, I think the reason that they picked him, honestly, is even simpler, and that's that they wanted to have something to separate themselves from Ghost of Tsushima. I don't know if they necessarily wanted their protagonist to be one-to-one compared with the Ghost of Tsushima protagonist. It seems to me like they waited way too long to get to this game, to the point where they needed some kind of gimmick to separate what they're doing from games like Ghost of Tsushima, or even from the fictional universe type version of Sekiro, where it was also kind of a Japanese samurai game. So it seems like Assassin's Creed took way too long to get to this point. I personally think that's why they picked Yasuke. Not that he's not an interesting historical figure, but I do think it's telling that he's the first historical figure that I believe we play as, and he is very different than the characters from those games. But he was purported to actually achieve full samurai status. A lot of people argue about this, saying he was only a retainer. I believe he started as a retainer. My understanding is that it was documented that he did eventually become a full-on just samurai, but historians are going to argue about that more than me. To me, when I'm looking at this game, I'm looking at, is this going to be a fun game? Is it going to make sense? And so far, it's looking like the answer to me, from what I'm seeing and reading, is yes. So Yasuke is going to be this more warrior type character. He is that samurai. He's not a striking from the shadows type person as much as Naui is. Naui is actually fictional, but she is the daughter of a real historical figure in Japan, who I'm not going to try to pronounce because I know I will butcher his name, but Naui is actually where the shadows bit comes in, I believe, because this is taking a lot of very, very interesting inspirations from games like Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. Now, that's a game series that I grew up on, but something that I think is really cool about this is that they're actually focusing on the idea of shadows themselves. That's not just a title, it plays into the gameplay mechanics. Game director Charles Benoit said, "The thing that shines the most, I feel, in Assassin's Creed, it's really the hidden blade, the assassination, being able to stay hidden. So that's the core of what we want to keep. What we needed to push forward was to make it feel a bit more modern in the approach." And so what they did was they incorporated a dynamic lighting system into this game, where sunlight, torches, and lanterns can basically affect the viewpoint of other characters. Essentially, they can see you if you're not in the shadows. So it's very, very cool the way that they did this, because the way they're describing this is very much Splinter Cell, which if you've played the old games, it was very much focused on lighting, trying to get into the shadows, trying to hide in the darkness. So maybe it was at night, maybe there were lights on in a small town and you were trying to not be in the light so that you could kind of sneak around, is a very simplified version of some of the Splinter Cell gameplay. Now that's kind of what they're going for here. They also actually talked about physics-based parkour in a way. Now this is something I'm very interested to see how this actually plays out. Jonathan Dumont, the Assassin's Creed Shadows creative director, said that parkour has always been something that's pretty iconic and pretty core to the stealth experience because they go hand in hand, and talked about parkour, saying that they gave Naui a grappling hook this time, which is very similar to, again, what we saw in Syndicate, but then said it's all physics-based. So there's a little bit of improbability sometimes when using it. there's a danger to using it, but you could also perform assassinations from it. So what I'm interested to see with this is if the entirety of the climbing system is physics-based, or if it is only the grappling hook that's physics-based, and if the rest is a little bit more automated still, a little more scripted. Like, obviously the RPG era of Assassin's Creed became almost entirely automated climbing, and then with games like Mirage, they tried to walk it back, and they did a little bit of a middle ground, I would say, between the old climbing style and the more automated kind. But a lot of people have been asking to go back to more manual type climbing, so I'm interested to see if this is pushing in that direction. But there are also things in this game that I think are cool, like for example, the ability to just knock out enemies with hand-to-hand, stealth, which they talked about in the IGN looks at this game. So that's something that I think is fascinating. And they did say that, enemies can now be knocked out, unlocking the option for a more pacifist playthrough in the IGN article. But something I wanted to say is plenty of assassins have been able to knock out enemies before, especially in the era of, I would say, Assassin's Creed 3, 4, and Rogue. If you just went up behind somebody and just did melee with nothing equipped, you could just leave them kind of writhing on the ground knocked out. And there was also the ability to use things like sleep darts and all kinds of other stuff throughout the series. But yes, the series do focus more on killing than on pacifism, so it'll be interesting to see what actual effect that has on the gameplay. This game is using an upgraded version of the Anvil engine, and they talked a little bit about this as well, saying that they made a lot of objects destroyable or sliceable, and that they wanted them to have actual physics to how they were sliced. They are also going to have as well duels, or sort of duel-like encounters. And of course, if you played Ghost of Tsushima, which I'm sure I will show some footage of in this video since there is no gameplay footage yet of AC Shadows, you know that duels were a big thing in that game, so I'm interested to see how they will actually do that sort of thing here. They said when we have a mini-boss type of fighter, we really want it to feel like a duel. So this exchange of blocking, parrying, dodging, it's always like a dance. And that seems to play a little bit more into the RPG combat style of things, which was very focused on dodging, parrying, slashing. Some people hated it, some loved it. I think Mirage did a very good balanced approach to that, so I'll be interested to see how Shadows handles that as well. But maybe you connect more with one character or the other. Maybe you're more interested in the samurai story and straight up attacking gameplay of Yasuke, or maybe you're more interested, like I am, I would say, in the more stealth Shadows aspect of assassin gameplay like Naui. Well, you can kind of choose who you want to play as. It's very similar to Syndicate in that way, where there are certain missions where you play as a character, but a lot of missions you're able to choose who you play as. They actually did say that there are a number of personal quests in which a character is compulsory to play as, like you have to play as them to do that mission, but beyond that you can actually freely choose who you control. And they went on to say that's the beauty, because during a quest there are several steps you're going to go from one place to another. You want to have this autonomy and agency to choose how you want to play the setup. So you can even switch characters during the mission. You could play as Naui for part of the mission and then choose, you know what, I want to play as Yasuke for the rest of this mission, or maybe I want to play as Yasuke for this one step of the mission. I actually think that's cool, and that's going to add a lot of personalized gameplay to how you want to play this game. The part of this whole spiel that I'm going to be interested to see how well it's delivered is the idea of seasonal gameplay and a living, breathing world. I've heard the phrase living, breathing world more times than you can possibly imagine, and I'm old enough to remember when Fable launched on the original Xbox, and they were talking about grass being able to grow and all these things that didn't make it into the game. So I'm interested to see how this actually happens, because they did talk about there being a reactive world to a lot of these things. Now, the dynamic lighting and destruction, I'm pretty sure they can nail down. But they talked about seasonal gameplay as well, where the open world actually progresses through spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and every period is kind of bringing its own conditions, as was reported by IGN, which I thought was actually interesting with this. So for example, there are different ways you can go through the world depending on the season. They talked about winter, maybe a pond would be frozen over that you could, move through that route, and that would be a different route of infiltration than at a different time. But maybe, for example, in summer, you could choose to go prone and crawl into that pond and hide under the water. And going prone is actually a new stance in the game as well, and something that I've wished they put in the game for a long time, so I'm really happy to hear that. They did say that in spring, grass would grow taller, you'd be able to hide more in the brush. Again, I think this is really, really cool and interesting, even going on to talk about winter, maybe icicles would fall off of rooftops and reveal your position if you're trying to move around rooftops, but also howling winds would obscure your footsteps, and guard patrols would stick more to areas of warmth, allowing you to create or take new colder paths. And they said that the players would have to adapt to what that season was. Seasons are supposed to change based on your progress through the campaign, which I think is very, very interesting. But I'm very curious to see how this will actually all play out, because it's one thing to say all of this, it's another thing to actually do it. And I think that is where most games have failed in the past, is promising lofty seasonal gameplay and failing to make it work. I think one of the best games ever with it is sadly old Pokemon, where, you know, there would be different seasons and it would change the map. Maybe it's more cold, maybe you're able to more easily catch a Pokemon in this season versus that season. A lot of games are not actually able to kind of nail down what a season is and how it feels, and actually make it change the world, because you have to take into account for every mission in a game like this, what if the character is playing in winter? What if the character is here in the summer? What if they're playing as Naui in the winter? What if they're playing as Yasuke in the summer? You know, you have to take all those things into account. So if they were able to do that, this could be one of the deepest and most interesting and personalized stealth or combat experience Assassin's Creed's ever made. It just depends if they're able to fully nail that down. One change I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of is the idea of changing the viewpoints. They did say that in previous games, viewpoints were used to plot up to 12 new objective markers on your map. This was pointed out by IGN, but that in this game, they're now vantage points to be climbed. So some people are really going to like that, where you can look around and spot highlighted locations worth seeking out. To me, that comes across a little bit more like what they were in the very original Assassin's Creed game. It would reveal some activities, but a lot of times you'd go up high to take a look around, not necessarily for a ton of objective markers. They said that they did try and put a lot of variety into the targets you will go after, and that you will encounter a lot of these targets in the open world as well. And you are able to decide to play as either a shinobi, samurai, or both, and approach the quests with whichever character you prefer, as each possesses their own respective progression, stats, skill, and gear as well. So these are a lot of the things that we know about Assassin's Creed Shadows. It is worth noting that in typical Ubisoft fashion, there are also some tacky things around this game, like for example, being able to play up to 3 days early with Ubisoft Plus Premium, the Gold or the Ultimate Edition. Yay! So for people like me who like to do Let's Plays or like to cover content like this, essentially all the other people with more money are going to just buy some digital crappy version way early and be able to play it then, and everybody else who wants to just pay $70 for the game is going to have to wait and not get it 3 days early. I've always hated early access. I really think that this is something that deserves to be called out and should keep being called out and put down, because what this leads to is tons of spoilers online early, tons of people having the game story ruined for them regardless of what it is. You know, it's just obnoxious, so that's something I find really dumb. And I also find it a little dumb that there is 3 different versions of this game that you could pre-order. One's the base game, one is the base game with the season pass, of course, and 3 days early access, and then one as well is the ultimate pack, the season pass and everything, but that one is up to $130, which I guess they went back to a season pass, and they did say that it'll include a bonus quest on day 1 with additional unlockable content as well as 2 upcoming expansions. And as always I say, if the content is day 1 available, I think it should just be in the base game. I don't think it should be being patched in or added in with an add-on. But that's just me. This is typical Ubisoft. It's frustrating to see that, because I think that the game itself looks really cool. There's a lot of awesome stuff around it, but I'm not a fan of some of these things that they're doing outside of the game with the business practices again. If you enjoyed today's video and you want to leave a like and subscribe for more content, I do appreciate it very, very much. Like I said, I have an Assassin's Creed playlist on this channel. I've also been playing through some Assassin's Creed games on my Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays, which will be in the description and also probably in the comments as well, but I hope you'll check that out. I hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay shui.